Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video. I've got an interesting one here with you guys today. I've got a friend, James Briggs. He's from Australia, and he's actually one of the owners of the HX50 as well. Gotten to know him through this program. I want to sit down and chat with him a little bit because he had something very interesting happen. 2 days ago now, James? Was it on
It was on
Saturday?
Saturday Australian time. Yeah.
Saturday. Okay, so just to set it up for you guys, James owns a Cadet, a Robinson R44 Cadet, 140 hours old, right? So it's basically brand new. Is that right?
Yeah, I picked it up in October last year.
Crazy. Now he had something interesting happen to him on Saturday that forced him to basically have to do an auto rotation into a field. So let's just go over it. Why don't we start with the beginning? I'm just going to ask questions as you kind of go through here, but explain to me what happened initially. I've kind of heard the basics of the story, but I haven't even gotten all the details yet. So what happened initially? You were flying at like 3,000 feet, is that right?
Yeah, so I was flying across the heads at the end of Port Phillip Bay, where Bass Strait goes to Tasmania. So
Yep.
it's about a three-mile gap. So I climbed up to 3,000 foot to go across that gap and obviously be within auto-rotative distance. And then I got to the other side, and my plan was to descend down to 500 foot and continue around the bay coastal.
Yeah.
So I started, a steady descent, sort of a cruise descent. It wasn't overly steep or anything, nothing that I hadn't done before.
Yeah.
And at 2,000 foot, I just felt this big, there was noises and a big surge in the engine. So
when you say surge, like the RPM started climbing?
Yeah, it didn't start climbing. It just went from like sitting in the green to just bang.
Spike.
It was up there.
Spike. Okay, yeah. Got it.
And the most noticeable thing was the sound.
Okay, like a bang or a vibration, or what kind of sound?
Nah, just like a woo.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. Interesting.
I had a Bose A20 headset on. So you obviously got noise cancellation, but it was very noticeable, and just a really different sort of feeling and noise.
Yeah. Any yaw associated with it or no?
No.
Or nothing super noticeable. Okay.
No, I was doing, probably 80 knots, 90 knots.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. All right. And then, so that's when you started rolling the throttle back. Is that right?
Yeah. So I rolled the throttle back because I was concerned that it would go too high and damage the engine, obviously. And when I did that, then I had the low rotor horn on the rotor RPM go off.
Of course, yeah, because you still have lots of collective pitch then at that point.
Yes.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So then at that point, so now your needles are basically split, right? So you got low rotor, high engine.
Yes, which normally, when you're looking at them and you sort of expect when something's going to go wrong, you expect your engine revs to be the one that's dropping and your rotor revs to be up there.
Exactly.
So that's what sort of confused me for a second. So obviously I dropped the collective and basically played with the throttle sort of back and forward to try and get what I thought was a governor failure, try and get the governor to come back on and take control of it.
Yeah.
But also trying to roll the RPM on the engine back so I wasn't overspeeding it.
Right. So did you have control of the engine RPM then at that stage? So collective is down and then you could rev it up, rev it down, but you couldn't really keep it anywhere stable.
Well, I felt like no matter what input I did on the throttle, I wasn't getting the response on the tacho. So it seemed to be, I couldn't, even when rolling it off, I don't remember seeing it drop back into the green. It was sort of, it was loud and it was up there the whole time, and I couldn't get it to come back down.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Now, before we continue, I just want to tell everybody, first of all, you're a relatively low time pilot. So it's not like you're an instructor that's flying every day or something like that, right? About how many hours do you have?
I actually added it up this morning for the ATSB report. I've got 333.7 hours.
Okay.
And
So
that's most of my time training. About 70 odd hours was in an R22, and then there's
okay.
about 250 hours in the R44 and 1 hour in a G2.
Okay, amazing. Yeah. And you know, just for everybody else's sake, I lost your video there, but for everybody else's sake, you know, James did an absolutely incredible job with his auto rotation, and the helicopter is undamaged, other than the stuff that we're going to talk about at the end, as far as, you know, things that were wrong with it to cause this whole issue. But the auto rotation was successful, and you did a great job. So so let's continue down. So now you're flying it down, and what's your focus at this point? You were saying before.
So I had a passenger who thought it was a joke, and
Right.
he's like, you know, oh, you know, we should, you know, you're gonna bring the power back in, right? Like, and
Yeah.
I'm like, nah, this is real, Jace. It's we're having a real auto rotation here.
Oh
Because
man.
we were
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about autos maybe, you know, 5 minutes before when we were crossing the water. We thought, oh, imagine if we had to
Oh,
auto
okay.
here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Crazy. Yeah.
so I obviously rolled the throttle off, began the auto, then sort of spoke to him for a couple of seconds, and then I did a mayday call,
Yeah.
and just sort of said where I was. Said I think it's a governor failure. Basically, we're in full auto rotation, and then got off the radio, and then I noticed I was very, very focused on, all right, where am I going to land this thing? Because I was at 2,000 foot. I was looking around. I was trying to determine where the wind was coming from. I was trying to keep him calm. And then I lost a lot of airspeed, and sort of then my focus went to my airspeed, and thought, well, I've got to get this speed back up.
What do you think
and
you
what I
went to?
realized,
Like, what kind of speed do you think you got to?
I think I dropped to 40 knots.
40 knots. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
At the top of the auto, but I was still at about, you know, 1,800 foot.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So then I picked out, you know, where I thought I was going to land, and sort of focused a lot, going back and forward from there. And then I did another mayday call, because I thought, you know, I haven't stated a few things, you know,
Right.
POB, you know, just spitting out all the information I could. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I got out, and they asked a few questions back, which I, you know, was able to reply and get the information out to them. And I remember them saying they've got, you know, emergency services on standby, and as soon as I touch down, regardless, just try and talk to them straight away.
Right. It's amazing that you had the presence of mind to actually do not only one mayday call, but 2 mayday calls. That's impressive. It's pretty rare that somebody actually gets something
2,000 foot in an auto goes for a long time. Like it.
It
Looking
depends
back
on the
on
helicopter,
it, like,
but yeah.
In the moment for me, it didn't feel like a long time, but then you know, for my passenger, he said, oh, it felt like it went forever. Like he had time to text his miss, say he loves her.
Oh wow, no way.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay, all right. So
then I sort of picked out my area, and we started to get down lower, and you know, I was aiming for 70 knots. I was into wind at this point. I was pretty happy with how everything was going. And then I realized I had a lot more range than I thought, and I got to the area where I thought I was going to touch down, and I thought, do I turn out a wind? Do I do an S bend? Do I try and slow down? So it was a split second of indecision, because there was a paddock and a road with a line of trees, probably 50 foot tall, the trees. So I decided, you know, push the nose forward to 80 knots. And then to get over that row of trees. I passed the row of trees, I reckon, probably about 70 foot. That felt like they were pretty close. And that was at 80 knots. And then as soon as I came in there, I tried to reduce the speed just slightly. And then I got low and thought, you know, we're about it's getting serious now. And so I remember I did some night VFR training last month, and we did one auto in that before the weather turned bad. And I remember him saying, you know, wait till it feels yuck. then wait another 2 seconds, then start your flare. So I did that. I felt like, oh, we're getting close. And then I just remember flaring as hard and as long as I could until the point, it felt like the helicopter was just about to sink, and then flattened off and pulled collective, and we were 4 to 6 foot off the ground. We were right there, and then it just touched down in soft grass, and then it was a bit of a celebration with the passenger. He was patting me on the back and saying, you did well, and then I got straight onto air traffic control, said, we're fine, we've touched down, there's no damage, we're not injured. They asked if we wanted the police and the ambulance. I said no, that there's no need. And then a few pilots in the area jumped on the radio and said, well done, mate. And that was sort of it. They took my phone number, and then they rang me. Air traffic control rang me off the radio and asked a bunch of questions. And but it was a surreal experience.
I can imagine. Oh man, it's crazy. I've been flying for 9,000 hours, never had an engine failure, which, knock on wood, let's hope it stays that way. Or any sort of emergency that forced me to actually auto rotate for real. So you're getting it young in your career. Now, to back up a little bit, the initial spot that you had chosen, how would you describe it? Like, it was a field, relatively flat. What kind of, is that true or no?
Well, I was directly over the top of a town. So those who know Melbourne, I'd come around the bay, and I'd crossed over, and I was directly over top of Queenscliff, which is, it's not a massive sized town. Like, from 2,000 foot, I could sort of auto rotate from one side to the other. Right. Then I remember sort of trying to determine the wind, and then just picking out an area that, had many fields, not just one.
Just one. Yeah.
So I had the town, and then I sort of had, farmland, as for at least sort of five kilometers sort of thing. Yeah. If you know kilometers.
Yeah, for sure.
We're in kilometers.
We're in kilometers. It's all good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, out of curiosity, go ahead. Sorry.
Then I knew that if I missed the first spot, which was a field with a few sheds, there was some cattle in there. It looked flat, so I was happy with it.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, then, because obviously I'm looking at this from an instructor's point of view, where I'm looking at students all the time, trying to learn how to range variate and stuff like that, and just lots of experience of auto rotations in the past. It's very, very easy. I've noticed, anyways, in my experience, it's very easy to misjudge from a higher altitude where you're going to go, and then realize low altitude that you're not going to make it to that spot. It's interesting how, an auto rotation in some ways is actually easier from 1,000 feet, because that closing angle very quickly. And so you can pick a spot and be very decisive and say, okay, because most of our training, yourself, probably the same thing. Most of your training for auto rotations is from 1,000 feet, right? It's just it's a high enough altitude that you have time to think, but it's low enough that it doesn't take forever to get there, right? And
it's in the surf area.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very predictable and so forth. So you get up to 2,500 feet, and all of a sudden that aircraft glides much farther than you expect it to, and you're in a cadet. So you're two people in a fairly high inertia rotor system, so you can actually glide pretty well with that thing. So that's interesting, how you get down. At what altitude do you think you were, just approximately, when you decided, no, I'm going to overshoot this spot, I better look for a different spot?
Probably 300 to 400 foot.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so it's super.
I really had to decide, do I slow down to 50 knots and aim for that spot, or do I push the nose forward, get over these trees, and just go to the next paddock? And it was, ground rush was starting to come on when I, had that moment of indecision.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Fascinating, because it's interesting to think, had you chosen the other option that late in the game, I don't know that it would have ended as well, because if you had decided to slow it down to, let's say, 50 knots, I don't know that you would have ended up with anywhere near as good of a flare, and you might have gone mush through that flare and smacked it on much harder. But then on the flip side, if you hadn't made it over those trees, it could have ended poorly as well, right? So it is, it is that split
Yeah,
second decision,
yeah.
which,
And I guess
is,
when I
yeah,
picked the original spot, I wasn't in the front of my mind that I had an out, but
yeah,
I knew that I had field,
yeah,
and I sort of picked the first field, thinking, oh yeah, that's where I'm going to make it to, thinking that looks
yeah,
like a long way away.
yeah,
But yeah, I was able to have those couple of outs behind it without having to turn and
yeah,
muck
yeah.
around too much.
Yeah. Now, just a curiosity question. When you chose the initial field and you were on your way down to it, did you have a very specific spot in mind saying like, I'm going to land on exactly that location? Or you're just saying, I got a field, I'm happy, there's an open spot. Anywhere in the field is going to be good enough for me. Is that kind of how you viewed it?
There was a few buildings and a couple of tree lines, and I
Yeah.
guess there was a big green area, and I was
Yeah.
aiming for the center of the green area.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, because what
But
I
I
find
think
a lot of, yeah, go ahead.
I've been a skydiver for 10 years.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah,
I've
makes
always
sense.
been taught to you go for accuracy, but then you always have an out, and landing safely is more important than accuracy. But I think my brain has sort of been trained. I'm very familiar with being at 3,000, 2,000 foot, because we open at 3,000 foot.
Yep.
But I guess in the back of my head, I've got a glide ratio tuned in there for the
Yeah.
canopy I've been flying for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So I think, not realizing at the time, I think I sort of picked out a spot that I felt like I would land if I landed off a drop zone, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That makes sense.
but yeah, I didn't think of that at the time. But the more I assess it, the more I think my skydiving career
Yeah,
influenced some of the decisions.
for sure. I can totally see that exactly. And also too, I mean, there's just so many factors at play. But I think one thing that's really important, which was the case in this scenario, where you you went for the safety overall instead of saying, you know what, I'm just going to stay committed to the spot, because sometimes staying committed to the spot is not the right option. Sometimes it is, sometimes
Yeah,
it's not. And for you, you chose to have a little extra speed instead of too little speed, and that's always going to be better, because for a flare, you'd always rather have either the perfect speed or an extra 10, 15 knots or whatever, as opposed to too little
yeah,
speed. Because in a Robinson, I haven't flown the Cadet, but I'm guess it's pretty similar. Around 60, 65 knots is sort of the sweet spot for a flare. And
yeah,
so, but if you have 50 knots, it's gonna feel horrible going through that flare, or even 45 knots or something. So the moment you try and say, oh shoot, I'm not going to make it, I'm too close to the end of the field, and you try and turn downwind and you start getting too fast of a descent rate, and then you bleed off some speed, the whole auto can go sideways on you in a hurry, and the end of the auto can end pretty poorly, right? So it was a
yeah,
good choice. I think you made a good choice to be able to keep that speed, get over your obstacles, make sure that you had the speed that you needed for that flare. So that was really good. Nice work, man.
yeah. Well,
That's
it
crazy.
happens so quick. You think,
Yeah.
you think that you have time to assess the choice. Like the decision was like a split second. Like, oh, I don't think I'm going to make it here. What options
Yeah.
do I have? Just push the
Yeah.
nose forward.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's where training comes in, because that second decision really comes down to just repetitive practice, right? Doing it again and again and again. So
And that's it. Like,
yeah.
I think all of this, did I just fluke one auto in my career? Maybe. But I think a lot of it comes down to my training. And I think if I can
Yeah.
mention Chris Wakefield, the
Yeah.
head instructor and owner of Melbourne Helicopters.
Yeah.
He taught me all my autos, and he's the one that's drummed this stuff into me, and it came to me at the right time. And I think
That's awesome.
if anyone should be taking credit, it's Chris Wakefield.
Yeah, it's so cool, because you hear your instructor's voice in your head for years to come, right?
Yeah,
And the more
yeah,
practice you can have, the better it is. And for private pilots, there's so many people that watch this channel that are private pilots, and for them to, what's unfortunate, I see the whole variety, right? That what's unfortunate is, depending on what country you're in, you can go and get yourself a private helicopter license, and in some countries, I don't know what it's like in Australia, you don't actually need to ever go see an instructor again. You can fly for the rest of your career. You never have to do an annual check ride or anything like that. And there's some pilots that are like, sweet, I don't have to go do a check ride. Great, I won't see an instructor again. And then there's other guys
Yeah.
that are, they're like, I want to stay fresh on this. So they'll just call up the instructor every 6 months or a year or whatever it is. And they'll just, keep getting refresher training and stuff like that. And so I think as a private pilot specifically, where there's no structured setting that you have to do something specific. I know certain countries you do. The more often you can pop up there for an hour or 45 minutes or whatever it is, and just go bang out some autos and do some recurrency and just make sure that your rust is kind of shaken off. That's gonna save your life down the road. So
yeah, I think people, they might blow their budget getting their pilot's license, and then they sort of think, oh, I'm not spending another dollar there. I can't afford it, or the flight school's milking me or whatever. But I think you'd much rather be, or they're scared of doing autos. I think you'd much rather be scared of doing an auto with an instructor next to you than being scared of doing an auto for real because you haven't practiced.
Exactly. No, that's for sure, man. That's crazy. And then after the fact, now just run me through a little bit of what you guys have found in the last couple of days here. You said something about the engineers looked at the fan, and there was nuts loose on the fan. What's I don't know what you feel comfortable talking about, but
it's all speculation at this stage. But there possibly one of the magnetos is a little bit out, the contact points. And the fan, because they were going to send a high time pilot to come down and fly it back, controlling the throttle by hand. I was in the paddock for a good 5 hours, so I just started looking over absolutely everything. And I found that the fan looked like it had been spun up. I had started at the start of the day. I did my daily. I saw the lines that the engineers do across the fan were all lining up. And I started luckily in front of Chris and in front of another. They were in the G2 and they saw me and heard me start up. I definitely had the throttle closed. And then so there seems to be a couple of what happened. The fan was spun up when I found it, but after I landed, I rang the engineer, and after about half an hour, we did some ground tests. I picked it up into a hover. I taxied over to the nearest gates. It seemed to be flying fine, but the fan had spun up, got that hot that it had welded itself back onto the shaft. So had we tried to fly it again, the fan most likely would have come off. But we don't know. There's definitely some loose bolts there, but we don't know whether they've come loose because of the heat and the plastic melting in between them, or whether they were, loose at the beginning, or. But it's I just, all I care about is that first of all, we're safe. Second of all, hopefully the insurance doesn't come into it because the flight school's paying it. And then third of all, that, hopefully it's a warranty issue. Robinson have always been pretty good to me. I've dealt with a cadet. I've had a cadet, got two now. I've always felt they've been good to deal with. We'll just wait and see. All I care about is that it's not ever pointed at pilot error, because I just don't want that mark on my name. But, I can't see how it would happen in normal flight. It just seems strange, and but I'll let the engineers do the investigation and find out where it goes, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, like I say, lots of people watch my channel. I know that some guys at Robinson love to watch my channel as well. So Robinson guys, if you're watching, make sure we get some really good warranty for this guy.
Yeah, I can't speak more highly of the cadet and Robinson. I love Robinson, and
we'll get some good warranty for you. And I think anybody watching this and anybody listening to this, I think for me the purpose of getting you on here was just because I think there's so many great lessons to learn, and anytime you can walk away from something like this and be able to talk about it, so many people can learn so many things from it, right? So that's why I wanted to have this conversation with you. And I think anybody listening to this, they can see clearly that you did all the right things. You can, hindsight is 2020. You can always look back and say, well, you could have done this, you could have done that, or whatever. And I can't look at any part of what you did and say, no, I think you should have done this specifically, right? I think with the only advice I could give, for anybody out there, would be, if you have the training and the ability to range variate all the way to the ground and stick to the initial spot, you probably would have had a higher likelihood of full-on success. You had a full success in this one, but a higher likelihood of nothing else going wrong if you would have been able to make it to the initial spot. That's the only thing I could say. So let's say, you could recognize early enough to say, listen, I'm going to overshoot. I'm going to do some range variation early at 1,000 feet, for example, right? To know that you're going to make it into that spot. Then the only thing for me is like the scary part is at 300 feet saying, oh, now I have to go to the next one because I'm not going to make this one. Let's say you hadn't made it over those trees, right? That could have ended totally differently. I'm glad it didn't. I'm glad it all worked out amazing. But
I think if I can add to that, if you are high, try and maintain a constant airspeed rather than, I spend a lot of time looking around and, I'm meant to be looking at this, I'm meant to be looking at that, and looking for the spot that when I look back to my airspeed, I was above it there. I was 1,800 foot and I was doing 40 knots. But then that could have played with my depth perception and where I thought I was going to end up if I hadn't just focused on my airspeed for the first 1,000 foot and then decided, right, this is where I'm going to land based on what I've done the last 1,000 foot.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. There's always so many lessons you can learn. But I think, looking at your scenario, you did just a top-notch job. Absolutely amazing. So proud of you. Awesome.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, no, it's really good, man. All right, well, let's leave it with that. Thanks for taking the time. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad that you're safe in your machine. You know what? Anytime, the stuff that you're going to have to deal with now is trivial compared to what it would be like if somebody was injured, or even if you had to roll the helicopter over. It's all pretty trivial stuff now. So you can smile, you can be proud of yourself, and you can go fly another day. So it's exciting.
Yep. Thanks, Misha.
You bet, buddy. Good work, and thanks for taking the time. I appreciate it.
No worries.
All right. We'll talk soon.
Yep. See ya.
All right. See ya. See you guys. Have a good day.